Welcome to the Empathic Mastery Show. I'm your host, Jennifer Moore, and I'm so glad you're here. This is a place where we talk about what it means to be highly sensitive and empathic, how this impacts all aspects of our lives, and we explore tools, resources, and solutions so we can shift from absorbing all the thoughts, feelings, and energy of the world around us to being beacons for calm, love, and healing. Hey there, everybody. I am really delighted to be here today with a wonderful guest, Vanessa Perry. And I got to meet Vanessa when she invited me to be on her podcast, Stigma's Anonymous. And Vanessa and I hit it off so well. It was like, oh my God, we have to have more of a conversation. Please come and join me. Yeah. So Vanessa is a career mental health therapist turned intuitive holistic counselor. With a belief that our troubles are rooted and treated beyond just the mind, she offers an open and accepting place for clients to explore non-traditional practices for healing and empowerment. From the medical model to witchcraft and everything in between, Vanessa enjoys helping men and women expand into abundance and soul-led living. That just sounds awesome. Welcome, Vanessa. I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you so much for having me. I mean, it really is an honor. I feel like anytime anybody wants to hear your story or hear your input and share it with their audience, but I really did feel that way when I chose to reach out and ask you to be on mine. Oh, please, please, please. You know, like this is something that I need to, this is a person that I need to connect with. And I was right. You know, like it's like as soon as you came on, I thought, yes, like I knew it, you know, I knew it. So I'm just really honored to be here.
I'm so happy to have you here. And one of the reasons why, aside from the fact that you're just awesome, that I really wanted to have you on the show was because I wanted to talk about the impact of being a mental health therapist, what being a psychotherapist does to us as empaths.
Yeah.
And because, you know, I'm the daughter of an empath psychotherapist, actually. And, while my father didn't necessarily, I look back and I think about my dad and I realize in many ways he was also, he didn't appear to be highly sensitive, but that was because of a frontal lobe brain injury. But I think that in many ways he manifested his sensitivity through a lot of activity. He was a Virgo, but he was a social worker. So I grew up with two people in the human service field watching the impact of being an empath. And I think it's something that we really need to talk about because it does, like, bottom line, it's like if this is left untended, it turns into burnout for sure. So
absolutely.
I really want to have this conversation. And I always like to start at the very beginning. I always like to start with like, where are you coming from? Like, tell me about your childhood. and just like what it was like to be a little empath. So tell me your story. Let's start at the beginning.
Let's do it. And it's funny because as you're introducing that, and when you do counseling stuff, you do inner child work. And it was like I'm dropping in and looking at myself as a little girl from the outside. And it's actually kind of a beautiful thing. And a lot of my understanding of my childhood has come from being a parent myself. My daughter is very much like me, though she's a Scorpio and not a Libra. There's an absolute difference in some ways, but that sensitivity is so very much there. And I feel like, I see that in her. I see the same types of things that were happening to me when I was younger. I was always too much emotionally. I mean, in one way or another, everything was like too much. It was too hard to handle, that I didn't want to do this and I didn't want to go there and I didn't want to see this person. And I, like that kind of thing, and how hard that is to handle when you don't understand what's happening, and like when I do this with my clients, we don't go back there to like bash our parents. We go back there to be like, well, what happened? Like, where did we get that message from? So that we can change that memory in our brains. And, my parents didn't quite know what to do with that. They were trying to, I guess, assimilate me to the world, right? The big mean world. And you have to toughen up and you've got to, have a tough shell, but like I couldn't do it. Mm-mm. And I was just, there were things that when I got frightened, I was terrified. When I got sad, I was super sad. like when other people were experiencing something, I was experiencing it too. I didn't know what an empath was. My parents didn't know what an empath was. It was just, you were too sensitive. You've got to toughen up.
Well, and you just reminded me of something. I remember I was so easily terrified as a little girl. And I remember the first PG movie I went to see. And I think it was like my birthday, and we were having it was like a movie birthday. And we were going to see, I think it was like Murder on the Orient Express, or Clue. It was but it was it was a very mild PG movie. I remember being absolutely terrified sitting in the movie theater because I was at a PG movie. And what was it going to be like? I was so scared that it was going to be scary. And I know for myself that I've been joking that I need to design a t-shirt that basically says too sensitive and proud of it. Because all of us were told as kids we were too sensitive. But you reminded me of this other piece of it, which was this idea that toughen up, you need to be more courageous, more bold. And I definitely know for myself that there was this deep sense of there was something wrong with me, that I was so flappable, that I was so easily terrified, that I was scared of the flying monkeys and the Wizard of Oz, and that I was too timid, that I didn't have the courage, and that somehow I needed to just get with the program, as you were saying, this idea. And I do believe that some of it is our parents really did not know any better. They just really thought we need to train our kids or, raise our daughters to not be little wilting flowers.
Absolutely. 100%. It happens even now with me understanding my daughter and understanding, she doesn't want to watch most of the Disney movies, especially the ones that are more recent, because they're very dramatic and they're very dark and the music is ominous, and it terrifies her. And for me, it's oh, I get it. There's nothing wrong with her. She doesn't have to choose that. But the feedback that I then get from people is, the world is going to, chew her up and spit her out if you don't get her ready for it. She can't go out into the world like this. She'll have her feelings hurt all the time. And it's first of all, she's 7. We have plenty of time for her to get out in the world and for me to teach her how to be an empath in the world. We got this, but also I know firsthand what that's like when somebody just completely denies you as who you are and just doesn't accept that is something that's part of you, and that it's a beautiful thing, because that's what I see from the outside now of, and it's healing my inner child to be able to look at my daughter and say, there's nothing wrong with you that you get super afraid. There's nothing wrong with you that you're timid around other people because you're getting blasted with their energy. You don't know what to do. It's okay, and I feel myself, right? Because this is how the empath chain works. I then feel myself get squirrely because she's feeling that way. And then, we're all managing this energy except for the other person who's not feeling it. They have no idea what's happening.
No idea what's happening.
Right. But it's definitely that, that mentality of the world is a scary place, which when you hear that as a kid and you're an empath who's easily terrified, I don't even want to go in it.
Right. Exactly. Well, and the idea that we need to somehow condition our 6-year-olds and our 7-year-olds, these little kids, to being tougher. You remind me of another thing, which is years ago, and we're talking years and years ago, I was babysitting for this family, and there was this little boy, and he was maybe 4 or 5 years old. And so I had rented Star Wars thinking he's a little boy. He's going to love this movie. It's going to be awesome. And I just remember putting it on. And within the first 5-10 minutes, there's a scene where I think the stormtroopers basically vaporize somebody. And this little boy is just sitting there with his eyes as wide as saucers, terrified of the movie and crying. And at the time, I was Oh, there's a lot more violence in this than I remember. Because I mean, I might have been
Right.
like 11 when I saw it the first time.
Hmm.
But my response was not, this little boy is broken or
Yeah.
wrong because he can't watch it. I was like, oh, I really screwed up. I didn't remember that this movie was so violent. And
Yeah.
I just took it out of the like
Hmm.
back then it was a, VCR. Just took it out and was like,
Hmm.
let's go do something different because
Hmm.
it was just not appropriate. And
Yeah.
it's sad to me that we live in a world where people are thinking that somehow that the children five,
Mhm.
like 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 year olds somehow need to like they have to adapt instead of us like trying to
Mhm.
acknowledge what they need and meet their needs.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And nurturing, that so
Yeah.
that they feel like they can be safe. I mean, it's an unsafe feeling when nobody understands you. And then
Right.
and it turns into, I mean, I can clearly see, where people pleasing tendencies come in and where masking comes in because you're like, wow, it is really unsafe to be me in these
Right.
situations. I
Right.
am affecting people negatively with my sensitivity. So I must do something to make it
Right.
to make it okay because I don't like how that feels when they feel that way. And that's a lifelong thing if you don't figure out that you're an empath.
Right. Exactly. Well, and you were saying, I think before we got on here, before we started recording, you were talking about like just being a chameleon and
Yes.
all of the ways that like you before you really grasped the magnitude of what you are and what it means to be an empath, like all of the ways that you were sort of trying to bend over backwards
Mhm.
to meet or to fit in.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Because of that, the sensitivity to the energy, right?
Hmm.
Like it's like I think, twofold, right? Like having been like kind of, I guess I'll say scolded, right? Like scolded for feeling, right? For being a
Hmm.
feelings person, then you kind of understand how you affect people. You don't want to do that. You learn that you're not supposed to do that. You learn that you show up for people the way that they can accept you, and so
Mm.
therefore we become chameleons. So when I'm with you, I know you as the audience. I will perform in whatever way to keep homeostasis here so that I don't have to feel like I'm affecting you negatively, because that in turn affects me energetically because of that back then inability to have any kind of shield of or grounding whatsoever. So yeah, it's an adaptation because of not being taught how to use it or understand it and nurture it for yourself.
Right, right. Well, and really being taught that the priority is other people's ease and comfort.
Yes.
And the idea of like, you want to be, you don't want to rock the boat, you don't
Mhm.
want to make people uncomfortable. And, God forbid you express a feeling and I mean, my personal theory is that one of the reasons why empaths make other people so incredibly uncomfortable is because we are expressing feelings that other people are trying their damnedest not to feel.
Yeah.
And so we're kind of feeling the stuff that's in the room that it's like we are the ones who are pointing at the elephant in the middle of the
Right.
room and the man behind the curtain going, hey, there is something going on here. And a lot of people are just like, yeah, no, we're not going there.
Right.
But I'm struck by how this capacity for being really sensitive to other people, but also, as you were saying, being the mediator, being the
Mhm.
person who wanted everybody to get along, because you obviously, like so many of us, felt better when people felt better.
Absolutely.
It makes so much sense that it kind of led you down the path of being a career mental health counselor, therapist.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, it's no surprise when you go on that journey, you're like, oh well, when you find out you can make money doing something that you
Right.
already do,
Right.
right?
Right.
And you
Right.
could hone in on those skills and you could use it to actually help people. It's easy.
Yeah. Well, and what an incredible relief, too. Like, I know one of the things that makes the healing work appealing and the counseling work appealing is because generally the people who are actually coming to us are actually ready or willing to speak the truth.
Yes.
And so there's something about that the mask has been removed about doing this work too, where it feels like you're more able to have a vulnerable, authentic conversation with somebody.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean,
Yes.
unless you are like a mandated therapist for like people with DUIs.
It's so funny that you bring it up.
Yeah.
That's exactly what I was thinking, is because of my, the way that my career has gone. I mean, I would go in and I would burn out, and I would go in and I burn out. So I tried a bunch of different things thinking that the burnout was because I didn't like the work itself. And the worst place, the place I was the least happy, was like the rehabs and things like that, because not that people aren't showing up because they want help, but the help that they want is a little bit like superficial at first. They're not ready for that depth that needs to be there. So it's incredibly difficult to show up and have authenticity there because the walls are so thick. And yeah, absolutely. It's a completely different experience when somebody is like, you have like the type of medicine that I need to learn for myself so that I can go. And, it's like, oh yeah, here we go. We're in it. We're doing it. We're honest. And it's going to be great. But when it's not that way, it's incredible. It's excruciating. Like that's the feeling.
Yeah, it really is excruciating. And I mean, thinking about rehab in particular, I just thought of Amy Winehouse's song, it's like, you're not going to make me go to rehab. No,
Yeah.
no. And, I mean, that's sad. That song her story is just so incredibly sad to me. I mean, just so incredibly sad. And, and the fact that we live in a culture that in many ways really profited off of her resistance to recovery. But then even when she was not resisting it anymore, it was kind of like her handlers were still really kind of like, hey, but, we can't afford to have you healthy. You're healthy. You're not going to be our cash cow. But, I mean, I was just thinking about like how often when it comes to those early stages of recovery for people who are expressing their inner turmoil through acting out, through substance abuse and other things, I definitely think there's also the thing of like ending up in rehab because of an ultimatum, like ending up in rehab because it's like jail or rehab, or ending up in rehab because it's like parents are like, if you don't do this, we're going to cut you off, or we're going to kick you out, or we're going to do any of number of things. And just like, so you end up with people who are like kind of willing to admit there is a problem, but not necessarily willing to, like, just not ready. As you were saying, it's like really on a superficial level, but not really willing to go deep into the work. So you did, drug. So you were involved in drug and alcohol counseling and working in rehabs, and that did not work so well.
It didn't work so well. I mean, when I say I didn't love the work, I think I mostly didn't love the companies that I worked for, because I believe that there's a lot of, really bad things happening in that field. There's a lot of taking advantage and things like that are happening that aren't, it's not really client centered in a lot of ways. There were many, many beautiful moments. I mean, I can actually bring to mind faces of clients that I truly adored, and that they did as much work as they could, as much as they could handle, because, you're coming off the streets. You can't just sit the next day and be able to access all of this emotionally and mentally, but that was the expectation. And so you would see, and again, like the beauty of being an empath and understanding that, being able to feel somebody's energy and feel their authenticity and feel their walls if the walls are there. So, some good work was done, but the field itself being what it is, it's really difficult to crack that egg, because especially the temporary spaces that they're in,
Well, and the whole thing about understanding trauma and understanding how we protect ourselves in sometimes behaviors that look less than optimal or less than cooperative. And like, giving the support, giving acknowledgement, giving validation. I mean, you get somebody coming in and they're 1 or 2 days out of detox,
Mhm.
it's like, you can't just dive into the gnarliest, deepest part of the pool and expect to be okay. It's like
Mhm.
there's way too much. Like, we need to establish safety first. We
Yeah.
need to help somebody to learn how to regulate their nervous system. I
Mhm.
mean, I believe that most of us use drugs, alcohol, food, whatever, because we have dysregulated nervous systems and we're trying desperately to regulate so that we
Mhm.
don't feel completely out of our mind and out of our
Mhm.
body.
Mhm.
And yet, as you were saying, it's like there's sort of this expectation of like, okay, so now you're here, you're going to do group therapy and you're going to figure it all out and you're going to be awesome. And then as you were saying also, I mean, I'm fortunately, I've not been involved in it professionally, but I've been around it in terms of knowing of people, in stuff, and the whole addiction recovery movement is definitely kind of the Wild West. There are absolutely wonderful, wonderful places with great reputations and who are doing really amazing work. But then I've heard stories, I've got a family member has been in and out of rehabs. And one of the things that apparently is happening is like some of these rehabs are like recruiting former clients or former patients to go out and basically bring new bodies in
Uh-huh.
for a cut. And like some of the stuff and I did not know this, but apparently in many places, like halfway houses and like these residential rehabs are not even regulated.
Uh-huh.
Like pretty much anybody can put up a shingle and say, we're doing addiction recovery.
Mhm.
So, I mean, certainly there are places that have more requirements and roles, but it really is a wild industry.
It is. And
Yeah.
I grew up with family members in AA. So I
Mhm.
saw like the free model, right? Like you
Right.
show up and people support you, or you don't show up and, you do your own thing and like, it's totally fine.
Yeah.
But, then watching some of the practices that you said, that absolutely those things happened. And I think truly being an empath in those spaces, I mean, I was out of my mind, not just because of what was happening during the day, but because of the knowledge of what was happening. I was pregnant. The last rehab that I worked in, I was pregnant. I found out I was pregnant the week of orientation. So, I mean, the whole time that I was there, like, I was so glad because I knew that I was going to be able to leave there. But just watching the way that they treated the clients about as a number, as money, and being asked to like call people's jobs and be like, get an ultimatum from them. Either you stay another week or we'll fire you and stuff. And it was like, I can't do that. Like, I can't with my soul do that to these people. If they are not ready, unfortunately, they're not ready and you can't
Right.
have their money, was my thought process. But you're getting pushed in that direction as the counselor to make them stay here, make sure that they stay here, doing things that are, to me, highly unethical. And then so you feel bad for those people, who are in such a young stage of wanting help, but being so afraid, so
Mhm.
terrified. Like
Mhm.
these people watching somebody go through like kicking, it's awful, sitting in that room and I'm trying to get information from them and they feel like they're going to die in their bodies.
Yeah. Yeah.
Awful, right? And there I am, pregnant on top of it. I mean, I
Mm.
cried every day, Jennifer, every single day
Mm.
I cried
Mhm.
because it was awful, and again, like at that point, I kind of understood empathy, right? Like, and I understood empaths, but I didn't understand the depths of what that was doing to me and the womb trauma that could be going on, for my daughter. I mean, I know that it's a tangent that we went on, but I feel like it fits in with all of, how we see the ins and outs of things that in such a deep level because we feel
Yes.
it.
Yes. Well, and that's actually something I've been really getting at a whole nother level because I've been recording a lot of podcasts all at the same time. I've been on a bunch of shows and I've also been talking to a bunch of my guests, like, just like I've been kind of like, I don't know, cramming it. I've been doing, and I've been really struck by the fact that, it's not just about us feeling all the things, but we also seem to have this like Hawkeye view
Yeah.
where we can see all of the interconnections and or feel all of the interconnections and recognize all these pieces. And I've been getting at a whole new level how the neurotypical person often has a capacity to see the world from like with blinders on,
Mhm.
like they see what's convenient for them.
Mhm.
Whereas those of us who are highly sensitive empaths, as well as people often on the spectrum, ADHD, into any of sort of these neurodiverse spectrums, that we so frequently are seeing so much more of the picture and
Mhm.
taking in so many more factors and understanding all of the interconnections between these things, which to us is like, well, duh, of course. And yet it's amazing to me how frequently, if you talk to sort of the allopathic medical model, or
Mhm.
the sort of the standard practices, they're like, really, I never thought of it that way. I mean, I can't even
Yes.
tell you how often I've heard, I've never thought of it that way.
Right.
And it's like, well, how can you not think of it that way? It's all interconnected.
Right. No,
Yeah.
100%. I mean, I really, and it's validating to hear you say that because I feel like sometimes, and this is part of that. People don't always like that input. A lot of times people will see the like, well, I'm going to give you my worldview of it as like, I don't want to say being combative, but just, kind of being devil's advocate. And it's like, I'm not even trying to be a devil's advocate. I'm literally seeing so many things all at once. And then you add in the intuitive part of it. You're like, I'm tapped into all kinds of stuff, I guess, but
Mhm.
I don't question it. We don't question it. Once you start to understand yourself, you don't question it. But yeah, you'll be sitting there and somebody will say, hey, here's all of this. And you're like, oh, but here's all of this too. Yeah,
Yeah.
like let's all, I'm innocently like, let's put this whole thing together because that's how my brain works. And they're like, no, thank you. I have the
Right.
blinders and I do not like what you've just done because it feels like an attack on my straight and narrow path here.
Or you're going to affect my bottom line here.
Yes.
Yeah. You're going to affect my,
Yes.
yeah. Okay, so going back to sort of the story of, this journey. So you're pregnant with your daughter and you're
Mhm.
working in, and you had said it was your last rehab.
Yes.
So how long did you last there? Did you
9 months.
9 months?
When I say I was probably 3 months in, and I mean everybody that worked, the turnover was unbelievable. I
Mm-hmm,
was the
mm-hmm.
only person by the time that 9 months was over. I was the only person left from when I started. Even
Oh,
there was just so much turnover of it. So yeah, I was there for 9 months, and that was about as long as I needed to be
yeah.
to understand. Number one, this isn't for me the way that it is, happening. But, having my daughter just created an entirely different view of life for me. And that was actually when I decided, oh, I'm going to go out on my own because again, like how many times am I going to go into these systems and burn out before I realize that it's me going into the systems that's the problem?
Yeah. Well, and the systems are so broken. I mean, as the daughter of two people in human services, and my mom broke away and went into private practice as a psychiatric nurse, psychotherapist, and hypnotherapist, and so she really like went out on her own. My dad stayed in agency work and everything, but kind of moved from, he worked in children's protective services when I was a
Oh
child,
gosh.
so, and I mean, he was in the worst of the worst,
Oh.
but then he moved out of that and went over into like elder care and hospice, which I actually think, he was very well suited for that. And I think it was probably a lot less stressful because even though, I mean, you're dealing with people at end of life stage, it's a very, very different thing than when you're
Mhm.
witnessing, children being abused on a daily
Absolutely.
basis. But I've been around so many people in human services throughout my life, and I've seen this phenomenon of especially the sensitive people, the ones who really care and want to make a really big difference, that point where you realize how impotent you are, like
Mhm.
helpless you are,
Mhm.
how there's not enough funding, where everybody in the system is exhausted and burned out. They're not being recognized. They're not being paid well.
Mhm.
They're, and then you're watching a system failing where, if you're doing any kind of case management, it's like the resources are thin.
Mhm.
And sometimes it's like, it seems to me that the answer really is like, if somebody's basic needs were getting met,
Yes,
then a lot of these mental health issues would not be there. And
absolutely.
so, that systemic awareness of just how broken it is. But I've known
Yeah.
so many people who started in the human service agencies and then broke out of them to go into private practice because the agencies are so, the agencies, in my opinion, are a symptom or are of the brokenness of the system.
Yeah.
And, like, it's not like the agencies are just willfully broken. I think that
Right.
they really are trying to do the best they can, but with
Mhm.
very limited resources.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And it is. I mean, what you just said, you hit the nail on the head of like when you get into that space of like, oh, this is so much bigger than me. Like, how am I going to make the impact that I came in with my wide-eyed, oh, I'm going to save the world. I mean, for me, it started in high school. When I was a freshman in high school, I was elected into what they call peer outreach. So it was a peer counseling, service that basically it was like anybody was able to come get me out of class if they needed some support. We would go away on retreats and learn counseling skills. I mean, from that age, I was ready to rock and roll, but it was a container, right?
Mhm,
So
mhm.
I was like so excited to get out into the world and like do this like I was doing it already. And oof, I mean, it was like, oh, okay, it's not like that out there. It is
What a
hard.
rude awakening. Yeah. So you were really being groomed for this work from a
Yes.
very early age.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was really fortunate in that because I had two parents in human services, one thing I swore to myself, like very early on, was that I was not going to become a psychologist, a psychotherapist, or a social worker. And I was not going to get a degree in those fields. I ended up with a
Yeah.
master's in psychology and religion, but I was very, very clear that I was not
Yeah.
going to become a licensed clinician, like that was
Yeah.
not going to be my path because I'd watched it. I
Yeah.
grew up in it. And, but if you did not grow up around it, I just see that like so many people, they have stars in their eyes and they're
Mhm.
like, they're so hopeful and excited about the changes that they can help make in the world and what a difference they can make. And then
Yeah.
it's like, you end up in these ridiculous, like getting paid $10 an hour or $12 an hour, working overnights in a residential treatment center. And it's just like right up against, like, it's like you splat right up against the wall.
Yeah, absolutely. And so many of these, when we get into I mean, I'm already starting to feel the overwhelm of like, oh God, it is so deep. There's so
Mhm.
many problems. But having worked in, like I've worked in for profit, I've worked in nonprofit, I've now worked for myself, I've worked in rehab. I mean, when I say I tried everything, because I
Mhm.
knew from that early age, this is the thing that is supernatural to me. I can't do other stuff. When I go to do something else, I get bored very, very quickly. It is super unfulfilling. And I've done it. I've worked in purchasing 2 separate times to try. And it was like, no, this is the work that I have to do. And you see how certain things actually started to work and took their left turn, and how things just never did work at
Mhm.
all.
Mhm.
And, like, for example, the first job that I got when I moved to Florida, it was a community based. So I would go out to people's houses and sit with them there. But a lot of them were mandated, again, like, and there's a stigma attached to that. First of all, like you're not giving somebody something that they want. You're giving, and they're just going through the motions. And it's incredibly soul crushing,
Yes.
until you're like, if you're like me, I just kind of, and I've been in every place that I've ever worked at, I've always gotten in trouble for being me because I
Mhm.
will not be the cookie cutter. So I would go and I would sit with people and I would not do like what I was supposed to do, air quotes, because to me it felt like, well, I need to connect with these people on something other than I was sent out here because they misbehaved or whatever, something like that. I'm here as your ally. I am not here as your punishment. And there's a lot of those systems out there that these people are your punishment. They're not here for you. They're here because you did something horribly wrong instead of like, hey, you've got trauma. How do we handle what happened? How did we get here?
I just got chills when you just said that. I mean, literally chills running through my body, because it's like we are in a system that so frequently is blaming the victim, but also is like, it's all about taking away the dignity of people. Yeah. And I mean, I just fundamentally believe that while I think there is an extremely small portion of the population that comes out cognitively, like neurologically wired the wrong way, and just broken, and like who are truly in the psychopath, sociopath, like they're just bad and wrong.
Yes.
I sincerely believe that for most people, that what appears to be acting out and appears to be bad behavior is a response to trauma, and is a
100%.
response to, and that if you understand where they're coming from, even these maladapted behaviors that look like don't make any logical sense to the non-traumatized brain, make total sense if you're thinking about it from the standpoint of this is the best somebody can do to keep themselves, to survive and to keep themselves going. Yeah. So I love that, and it's so sad that you are an ally aligning with the people, like trying to be in a, establishing rapport, because I mean, fundamental bottom line, rapport is the core of all this work.
Absolutely.
So it's really ironic that you've got these agencies sort of sending you out into these mandated places where you are sort of like the warden, as opposed to the ally. And actually, that just reminded me of my husband before he went into private practice, was working with adolescents in group homes. And what was going on for him with that was that he was put in a situation where he was both supposed to be the confidant and the ally, and also supposed to be one of the authority figures that was setting the boundaries and the rules, and these children were accountable to. And it's like, it's at cross purposes. Right. You cannot be the confidant and the ally and the person that they can come and tell that they're acting out to, and at the same time be the enforcer of the boundaries and the discipline.
Right. And yet somehow, right, like even you explain it and it makes total sense. Somehow the people that are putting these systems together are like, that'll be fine.
Right.
And then wonder why it's not working.
Well, and I wonder if some of it is that, if you've got people who's training in, like human services policy and like healthcare policy, and management and business management, if they really don't have a basic understanding of psychotherapy and of psychology and of the human, the way we work, like maybe part of it is that they really just don't get it. Like nobody ever introduced them to the concept of rapport.
Right.
But
I
mean, talk about futility. Oh,
yeah. And it's soul sucking, right? Like, because that's what you don't want to be going in and out of people's houses that literally don't want you there.
Literally
they feel
don't
like
want you there.
As soon as you show up, they're guarded. They're like, I'm not telling you anything because it's going to be used against me, and I would sit in there like, well, I understand why you feel that way. I mean, it's probably true, I mean, it is, right? Especially with some of the substance abuse people, like, yeah, I'm definitely here. And when you mess up, I'm going to be the one that tells everybody that you messed up. And so why would you open up to me? I absolutely. Like, I get it. And there's so much with those systems, right? Like, so even when you think of me as the human, right? Because those agencies don't think of me as the human either, what it's like to bounce in between all of these people's houses and to gather all of that energy and to gather all that information and to do that work and expecting. I mean, the reason why we have burned out therapists and the reason why we have a mental health system that is not providing what it could provide is because it's about production
Mm-hmm.
over quality.
Mm-hmm.
When I would have to see 8 clients a day, that's too many.
Way too many.
It's
Well,
way
and
too
8
many.
and thinking about it, it's like 8 clients is actually like, I mean, I know people who've had to like where it's like they're doing like the 40-minute hours, and it's like they're
Yeah.
expected to be seeing anywhere between 10 and 12 people a day or 15 people
Unbelievable.
a day.
Yeah.
And I mean, I know people who are more in the nursing field where people are coming in and need to talk about what's going on, and they have maybe a half hour, 20 minutes to a
Yep.
half hour to just kind of manage things.
You can't do it.
No.
You have to sacrifice something at that point.
Right.
And quality, unfortunately, is usually the thing that goes, because most people can't just quit their jobs and say, well, I want to do 4 a day, right? You're going to get fired. Absolutely. You're not being productive in those
Right.
terms, but that's, a more comfortable throughout the day so that you have time to cleanse your own energy in between, so that you have time to gather your thoughts before the next person, so that you're showing up wholly for them. You're showing up like clear of everything else and not just one back to back to back to back. I mean, this is why I would get burned out, because in addition to being a human, being an empath, it's like incredibly difficult to have all that energy, all that hard, tough, heavy energy coming at me back to back to back.
Back to back to back. Well, and I'm just thinking about, additional factors, because I think that in my experience, a lot of addicts are actually empaths. Like a lot
Yes.
of a lot of addicts are empaths. And so you probably have a tape loop going where you're in there as a highly sensitive person, they're in there as a highly sensitive person. Not to mention the dynamics of like, usually it's not just them living there. There's other people there who are also interplaying. And then just even the energy of the space itself. And as a female going into people's homes, there's like that level of sort of the sketchiness and the sort of the sense of like, is this even safe for me to be here? Just because the court has sent me in or this agency has sent me in doesn't mean it's safe for me to be here.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like, it's the perfect storm.
Yeah, it really is. And for that just being my experience, and knowing that all of the other experiences that are out there, the social workers, like you were talking about with your dad, like having to, I mean, some of the places that you're going into and some of the threats that happen, because of the sensitivity, the nature of what you're actually doing and what you're providing, it's absolutely not really seen the way that it needs to be seen. But it's, I mean, at some point, I just keep hoping that if we're loud enough and if we talk enough about what we know to be true from being on the inside, that if you truly wanted this mental health crisis to improve, then these are the ways to do it. We don't have bad therapists. We have burned out therapists who are doing the bare minimum because they're surviving.
Absolutely.
They're absolutely, and not just the bare minimum because they're surviving, but because they're doing what they're told.
Yeah.
That being the other part of my career of getting in trouble all the time is, hey, if I show up at group with this packet and the group has something else to talk about, that's what I'm going with. And I will deal with how I didn't do the packet later.
I will say that, I do think, though, unfortunately, there are bad therapists out there.
Yeah.
And that they're because I have personally experienced, been on the other side of the chair and have experienced people who are massively robotic, who were going through the motions and asking questions and not making any connection with me. And where, I mean, I'll never forget, when I was in graduate school and we were doing, that kind of role playing thing.
Yeah.
And we were doing an exercise on rapport. And so I was the client and this other woman was the therapist. And I came in and just like basically acted like, did sort of, like walked in as a hot mess, like just really, really, really stressed out and everything. But I just will never forget, this woman is literally holding her notebook in front of her. And she's like, hello, my name is Julie. What's your name? How are you today? And I was like, oh my God, do you not even know how to just say hello to somebody?
Yeah.
Like she was like deer in the headlights, but it was kind of like, you should not be a therapist or a pastoral counselor or any of that. Because if you don't know how to just basically like get out of your fear, like it was just like, this is not something you need to read notes for, lady. Like you're just saying hello here.
Right. Well, and I will say, like, I feel because that's a perfect example, because I use that example sometimes too, of like how it was in grad school for me to be like videotaped, and how it was like, nod your head and do these things. And in my brain, it was like, you got to make sure you nod your head 5 times, you know what I mean? Like, or else you're going to fail, you know? And it was like, well, sometimes I don't want to nod my head, you know, like that doesn't feel natural to me.
Right.
I think that what's missing in the training of counselors is the humanness, right? Like, who's Julie? How does she operate? Who is she? What kind of clients does she fit with the most? How can she be comfortable with who she is so that she can provide good counseling for somebody? It doesn't exist. You know, like I can remember being, you know, you got to now that you're going to go out into the world as a counselor, you have to conduct yourself a different way. You know, people are going to judge you if you are, you know, out drinking at the bar, like all of that kind of stuff. You lose your validity if you, I mean, I can 100% remember that. And it's terrifying unless you have somebody else in your ear telling you that that's not true. I really think that's how we get the bad therapist, because most of us don't go into it thinking we're going to get rich, right? There is some heart and soul that makes you want to do that work. But when you're not taken care of as the human, who do you become? You become that robot. And it is so bad.
Yeah.
For both, right? It's sad for that person who wanted to, you know, get training and do the right thing, but it's really sad for their clients who are looking for some help and not getting it.
Right. Well, and I sometimes really wonder, you know, one of the things that I've also seen is that it seems to me that there's also kind of like lack of knowledge, lack of exposure. I mean, and certainly if you look at my husband and I are constantly sort of laughing about the portrayals of psychotherapists on television. I mean, oh my God, some of the horror. But, you know, I also do think that there are times where somebody thinks that this is what they want to do, and it's not what they want to do. Like in the same way that I had a family member who at many years ago had thought they wanted to become a massage therapist and went to massage therapy school. And as they started to engage with other people and started to engage with like actually doing massage therapy on people's bodies, they realized this was for the birds. Like this was not for them. And they had to just experience it before they could go, okay, this is just not for me. This is not where I want to be going. So I want to go a little bit forward, because I would love to talk about, like, you know, obviously you taking back your power and you saying, you know what, there's a better way to do this. So I'm curious, like, so you said that you left at 9, you know, you were there for 9 months. You left when I'm imagining your daughter was a fairly young baby. Now, I know for most of us, going from agency or established like 9 to 5 kind of gig to self-employment is usually not just a light switch that you flip on and off. So what was the transition period like for you? Like, how did you navigate from working in agencies to being, you know, hanging up your shingle and going into private practice?
Well, so, I mean, it definitely becoming a mom was part of the beginning of that process. You know, I had thought my whole entire life that I would be the working mom, you know, and that I would not want to stay home with my kids, because who wants to do that? And as soon as she came out, it was like, I don't ever want to work again. Right. Like I wanted to have a life where I could be present. You know, I wanted to be able to control my schedule. I wanted to be able to take days off if I needed to. I wanted to be able to know that when my child was in sports, I could be there and I wouldn't have to be bound to what the agency rules were. And I had never really thought that self-employment was something that I could do. You know, like ADHD, like just free-spirited, somewhat non-committal, felt like, okay. But I also, when I thought about going back to work, it was like, no. And at the time, my partner, my daughter's father, He didn't want me to go back to work. So I was lucky enough to have that time period to transition emotionally too before I started. So, I mean, I shouldn't say that it was too long, because it was only a couple months after she was born that I started trying to collaborate with people and trying to understand what it would be like. But at the same time, I knew 100% it was not going to be that clinical path. I couldn't do it. It was like my soul was like, if you're going to do this, you're going to show up as who you are. You're going to show up as that rebel who gets in trouble all the time for not following the path, as, you know, the person who does not just do the cookie cutter treatment plan, like through the book. Like you can't show up like that. You're not going to have your name attached to that. So that was basically when I started to get more spiritual about it. I started to talk to some people who were more into spiritual things, because that was what it felt like was missing. I was like, we're not seeing these people as humans. I'm not able to sit and connect soul to soul. And that's what I wanted. That's what I need to do. Because when that happens, that's when the magic happens.
Absolutely.
So, you know, it was a hard thing, because at the time, I feel like this is like 2015. It felt like there was too much programming in my brain to believe that it was valid, you know, to do it that way. I also wanted to do everything online so that I could travel. People were like, are you kidding? You have to sit in the office with those people in order to have the feelings, to have the energy, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And God bless the pandemic for it, you know, but you know, what's really interesting is that, so my husband and I have had multiple conversations about telehealth and because he's a psychotherapist. And so we've had multiple conversations about telehealth. And what's really fascinating is he and I both love working virtually. We absolutely adore working virtually. It is so much less of a strain on our energy system than working with people in our space. But he has one friend who has a number of psychotherapist friends who are not empaths, who hate working virtually because they cannot feel the energy in the way that they can if somebody's present in the room. And so I think we as sensitives are in some ways absolutely made for virtual work, in a way that the people who maybe need to be in the presence of an actual person to be able to feel or pick up on any of their energy or their cues or their body language, like it's much harder. So yeah, absolutely.
And I agree, because I feel there's clients out there that are the same way. You know, I mean, I feel like I've got clients that are waiting on me to be one-on-one, like in person. They're like, when are you going to do that? Because that's when I'm going to see you.
Yeah.
It's like,
not going to happen.
Right. All right.
If you want to do that, go find somebody else.
Exactly. I've thought about it. I've thought about it, you know, because I live near the beach. I've thought about doing like one day where we do like beach walks, because I love the beach too. Like it's, you know, somewhat for me too. But, you know, I also have clients who will only talk to me on the phone, and they're incredibly open, because there's enough in anonymity that they are like, oh, thank God, I don't have to worry about your face, you know, and what your face is doing
and how you're responding or how I have had some of the most deep experience. It's funny. I had one person who, when I first started talking with her about doing some EFT work with her, the idea of working via phone was like so weird to her. And yet I was like, if I work with you via phone in your home, in the safety, and you're in the safety of your own home and your own environment, you don't have to worry about like getting up and going elsewhere or doing any of these other things. Like you can just be with yourself. And we were able to go so deep. Like she could just sink into the sobbing of her traumatic, tragic story in a way that if she was sort of like keeping it together and showing up at the office, I'm not actually sure we would have been able to get nearly as deep and nearly as far. So yeah, I really love it. You know, there was something that you were saying about just like the system's not, I wanted to reflect on the system's not working, and the whole idea of like, we're supposed to be following these rules. And I've been recently listening to a book that is about complex PTSD. And, you know, hang on, I'm just like pulling it up so I can tell you the exact name of it, because of course, like, I'm like, what is that book that I was listening to? What My Bones Know by Stephanie Fu. And it is a book about trauma and specifically about complex PTSD. And really good. Highly recommend it. She's not a psychotherapist. She's a journalist. And so she's writing, but she's somebody who's done a great deal of work. And so she's as she's telling her story, she's very regulated.
Mhm.
But what she comments about is that the DSM-5 does not recognize CPTSD.
Mhm.
Therefore, you can't treat for CPTSD.
Mhm.
And that's the thing that is so insane about the psychotherapy industry right now is that we are, or not we, because I'm not in it, but that therapists who are adhering to the system are bound to diagnostic tools or diagnoses that are in the DSM, when it's like human experience cannot be compartmentalized down into a label and a code for the insurance companies. But it's like, it's so sad when human experience, if it's like you don't fit into the DSM box, we can't even treat you.
Yeah. Or we just fit you in a box.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is the worst.
We'll just say you have PTSD and therefore you're entitled to 6 or 9 sessions.
Mhm.
And if you're still dealing with it after that, it's your problem, not ours.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I mean, that was, I think, probably the top thing that drove me nuts about working. When I worked in smaller, I've bounced around, I don't know, probably 5 or 6 agencies. And I worked in like a smaller one, and it was right out of school. And I had done my internship there. So it wasn't new to me, but it was like that new responsibility of it. And I mean, I would be like, okay, but I don't want to diagnose them with depression. Like, I feel like this is just a situation that's going on. And it was like, well, the insurance is going to pay for just a situation. And it was like, okay, so now I'm going to give them a diagnosis of major depression, and they're going to own that because I'm their professional, right? Like, I'm the one that they came to say, what is wrong with me, right? Because that's how that language comes in. Oh, here, have the thing that's wrong with you.
Here.
Right?
Yeah. Well,
and it's not.
Well, and then you've also then you're dealing with the fact that, the whole insurance racket, then it's like somebody's got a code that they're diagnosed with and that they're going to be living with for the rest of their life. And it's a
Mhm.
pre-existing condition.
Mhm.
So, I mean, we could go down an entire, this is a different podcast. Like this is,
Right.
this is not the Empathic Mastery Show. This is more like what's broken about the American healthcare system podcast.
Yeah.
But
we could create it and do it, and it would be never ending.
It would be never ending. Yeah. And you and I have both made the decision to break away from it for these reasons, for,
Right.
to be like, there's a better way to do this. So you were saying, you had the freedom to take some time off and to kind of decompress and work with and sort of just be a mom for a while. So, and then you were saying you sort of found some people to collaborate with. So talk to me about like, what does it look like now?
Well, it's miles from that, because I was still so like, it has to look this way, and I have to get my license, and for validity, right? Like, I'm looking for validity everywhere. Now, what it looks like, I will say the reason why you see intuitive counselor is because I really allow my intuition to come in more. I would say more than the psychology. It like comes in, and it's almost like I bounce it off of that to get more information, if more information can be had. And it's very loose, right? Because I very much believe, even with clinical trials, I'm like, there's 7 billion people in the world. Those 3,000 are still a very small amount. And even if you replicate that 4 times, those 12,000 is a very small amount. So I take it with a grain of salt. But it's very heavy on the intuitive and very experiential. Like, it's very much, it's funny that they glazed over Carl Jung when I was in school, but I'm like, he said it all along. People, the person in front of you, the spirit part of them, the energy field of them, the universal connection, all of this matters. And you can't deny it. You can't not address it and expect to get the result that you're looking for. Right. So that's what I do now. And it was a process. It still is.
Yeah. Yeah.
Earlier this year is when I dropped my license.
Wow.
That's how long I carried it for, like, validity, but also for safety.
Yeah.
It just felt really safe. But yeah, I mean, it's a beautiful experience now to be able to sit with somebody and they can tell me that they were, grounding or earthing, or they, like, we can talk about going to get some Reiki after we've, brought up some trauma, and like all of the different ways that there are to heal that gets ignored in the psychology field, right? Like they're very mind and go in and change the mind only.
Well, and as the more I understand about like neuropsychology and brain science, and particularly the way that trauma impacts our brain, and like just thinking about the sort of the three basics of our brain stem, limbic brain, and frontal cortex. The thing is that as soon as we are in a state of stress that's like on a scale of 0 to 10, a 3 or higher, we flip our lid and we are not able to access our logical, rational frontal cortex. And so the idea that we can cognitively think our way out of stuff that by its very nature has gotten our frontal cortex to go offline is the most backward, like absurd and incredibly ineffective way to try to address stuff. We cannot think our way out of a situation that had nothing to do with thinking in the first place and everything to do with our nervous system, like going haywire. And it's so sad that we are, but it is actually exciting in that, in the world of EFT, where there's a cross-pollination in this world with energy psychology, and some of the clinicians and some of the people who are sort of in that kind of more research place, like there is a fourth wave of psychology that is starting to come in, that is starting to look at the somatic connections, that's starting to look at the impact of trauma, that's starting to look at and starting to say, talking our way out of this is not working. It's not going to cut it. We're not going to be able to get out of here by just talking our way out of it.
Right. Yeah. And even changing the way that we talk, our way out of it. There's a lot of times that clients will come to me and they'll say, I've had therapy for a bunch of years and this never came up. And it's like, well, yeah, because there's a path that you're supposed to follow, but I need to follow you.
Right.
Like I can't bring you over here. I need to know you and how you're even feeling in your body right now when you say those words, not just, well, okay, here's the opposite thinking. So when you think that, just think the other thing. Like I can't, because the way that I talk to my clients is funny sometimes. And we say brain like it's a person. Like brain is holding on to everything, every single thing, to make sure that we're safe. That is its number one job, is our safety. So anything that looks, feels, tastes, smells like something that was ever traumatic, it's going to come in there with that information. And we have to be able to change and give more information to it so that we can at least balance it out and be like, well, maybe, maybe not, right? Like, so that we can engage that logical thinking a little bit more. But there needs to be awareness of it. There needs to be, like a whole other approach to it. That's not just, here's the worksheet, or here's, when you're in panic, here's your 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 senses grounding. Like, whoa, we need to get to root cause. We need to get to, changing the brain, the messages that are coming through, and where that comes from is the trauma. We have to address the trauma.
We have
or else
to address
we're
the
just
trauma.
It's just symptom management over and over again.
Or recapitulating the same story over and over again. I mean, and I think that's one of the things about psychotherapy, is that it keeps us in the narrative. Vanessa, I cannot believe how fast time has whizzed by. I'm like, we are absolutely at the top of the hour right now. And we could this conversation is so rich. We could just keep going and going. So before we end, I always like to ask the question, if there was a message that the perspective you have now, that you could offer a younger part of yourself, a struggling part of yourself. And I think in your case, like the person, the 8 months pregnant, working in a rehab and, with massive amounts of turnover, what would be the message that you would absolutely want her to know? Like what would you want her to hear?
The first thing that came to me was listen to yourself. I think that that's the thing that I try to get most people to do, but I needed to do then too, was listen to yourself. Your body is leaking tears every day. Your stress level is where it's at. Listen to yourself. You are not crazy. You are not wrong. You are not, you're not imperfect. Just listen to yourself.
Such an incredibly, incredibly important message. Listen to yourself and listen to your body. Yeah.
Yeah. Because without that, we're operating on programming and it's not always the best.
No. Well, and we're operating on models that are about productivity and profit, not necessarily human, not necessarily people.
Right.
Is there any sort of last, I absolutely need to say this one thing?
I think that, and I have it tattooed on my wrist and nobody's going to see it right here. And it's the word believe. And I think that that's the one thing that is the hardest thing for people to do, is to find belief. But from everything that I have done in my own life, everything that I've seen in my own life personally, and the ways that I've helped other people, nobody is a lost cause.
Nobody is a lost cause.
Nobody.
Yeah. There's
always an opportunity to believe that there's something more out there. There is.
Well, and as somebody who believes in the sort of the immortality of the soul, I also really believe that there's a trajectory that goes beyond this lifetime, and that what might appear to be shattered and broken beyond belief in this lifetime doesn't mean that the soul is a lost cause. It just might mean that this lifetime looks pretty dire.
Yeah.
But there's alternative, there's options, and there's a future elsewhere or beyond this one too.
100%.
Vanessa, this has been such a rich conversation. It has been it's been the true.
Yes.
It's just so good.
It feels that way.
How can people get in touch with you?
So I can be reached via email, vanessaperrycounselor@gmail.com, or my website, vanessaperry.net. I am also on Instagram at c.stars.psych.
Excellent. And we are connected via Instagram. So if you guys are following my Instagram, just go look at my Instagram, you'll find a post with Vanessa tagged in them, as well as if you're listening to this, and driving or doing something else, you can always come back to the show notes. All of this information will be there. And check out Vanessa's podcast, Stigma's Anonymous, for some more awesome things. And while you're at it, hey, head over to Stigma's Anonymous and give her a wonderful rating. And while you're at it, head over to Empathic Mastery Show and give me a wonderful rating, because you guys, it's the, podcast ratings make the world go round and definitely help us to get the message out there. Vanessa, thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for being part of this. I really
Thank you for having me. It was a beautiful conversation as always.
So delicious. Yay.
Thank you.
As we come to the end of this episode, I'd love to hear what you're taking from this show. Please jump over to empathicmasteryshow.com to leave your comments. In the show notes, you'll find a link to grab your copy of my Empathic Safety Guide, 3 Basics for Finding Calm in the Eye of the Storm. And while you're there, please subscribe and follow this show. And thank you for your help sharing this show with the people who need it. Please help me to spread the word and send this podcast to friends or family members who need support living as highly sensitive empathic people. Then join me again when the next Empathic Mastery Show airs. Okay, one last time. Hop over to empathicmasteryshow.com for your Empathic Safety Guide. And until next show, shine on. We need you and your gifts here on this planet. So please don't judge your empathic rainbow by colorblind standards.